My name is Monica, and I'm a work in progress, but I'm also turning 50 years old next year. Seriously. So, I just wanted to come on and do a live. Like, I'm just trying to figure out where I want to go in the direction of my life. And I am a writer, researcher, educator, musician, a composer. I do a lot of things, and I just really started thinking about longevity. I actually was thinking about longevity long before a lot of people were thinking about it. So I think that's one of the things of why I tend to look the way I do. I'm putting my phone down. I hope that the mic is picking up what I'm putting down here. So I think when I go back into title this, I'll mention something to the effect of being a Gen Xer and a biohacker, because in the end, that's kind of what I am. Gen X biohacker. And yeah. So one of the main concepts that led me to looking and feeling the way I do, and I can go through some, I guess, some rundown things of things I do, was I wanted a quality of life. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about. I thought about that when I was young, and I grew up on a farm, homestead, and I just wanted a quality of life that didn't seem stressful. And I didn't think I was going to live on a farm my whole life, but I also knew that I wanted freedom in some form. And freedom to me means you get to choose what you want to do in life. So a lot of the things that I thought about kind of geared around me being free. So, and that also meant I had to push back against a lot of ideas and concepts that everybody else was doing. Just because everybody else was doing it didn't mean that it was okay or safe or something that was for me. And I noticed a lot of the eating habits that people had early on, and how people in my own family were passing away just because of what they were eating. And I can recall one particular family member who his doctor told him that if you continue to eat like salt and pork and all this other stuff, that you're not going to survive much longer. And his response was, I grew up eating this way. It's like, I'm not going to stop. And I promise you, it wasn't even a year later that he did die. He died. And those kind of things stuck with me. And he was stubborn. Let's just face it. He was stubborn. He did not want to change. He was not flexible. And that's one of the things that biohackers have to be. You got to be flexible. You got to be ready to make adjustments for yourself, not stick to certain things if they don't work. Okay, that's one of the top things that I recommend. And when I realized that you don't have to eat certain things, I started experimenting with food early on, and even in my teenage years. So I already grew up on a farm, right? So I didn't have access to a lot of junk food, even though we did eat junk food, and it was after dinner, and it was portioned controlled because we live out in the middle of nowhere, so you can't just sit there and eat a bag of chips or whatever. So there was portion control. That's one of the things, right? Then there is, yeah, just not eating everything that everybody says that you should be eating. And one of the things I started doing was I stopped eating bologna, hot dogs, stuff like that, processed meats. That literally was the first thing I stopped eating when I was a teenager, still as a teenager. So because I thought about it. I grew up on a farm, remember? Okay, so I would see my grandparents, cattle farm, and my parents made an attempt at it as well. So I knew where meat came from, like food, right? And I thought about it when it came to bologna and hot dogs. And when you look at the package, it will say it basically is saying, is telling you right there on the package, it is a combination of different animals depending on what you're picking up. Say, for example, you're picking up hot dogs. It could be pork, chicken, and beef, or pork and beef. And then they're not even, well, I mean, once you start learning how to read labels, then there's the fillers. So then you don't even know the percentage of what you're actually getting in those kinds of foods, right? Though to me, I know we talk about this, we joke about it, call it struggle meals. It literally are, they're struggle meals. These are foods that you would eat in emergencies, okay? This should not be a part of your regular consumption. If you're stranded out in the middle of nowhere, yeah, eat it, because how you need to live, right? But this should not be every Tuesday of your life. It shouldn't. So restricting, taking away some things that I don't have to eat in my diet was important. So I stopped eating that. And I read this book, and I was also on the trajectory of becoming a fruitarian. And for some, chick in the 90s, that was controversial. Like, I didn't tell anybody I was trying to do that. I just slowly started trying to do it. And according to the book, they were telling me it was like a process of maybe 7 years or something like that, where you start eliminating certain things. So I was on, of course, eliminating the processed foods, the processed meats, definitely. Then I kind of adjusted what I was doing, and this is while I was still in high school, going into college. I was like, I don't have to eat meat every day, and you don't have to eat meat every day. I grew up in the South. I know everybody's like, oh, if you don't eat meat, you're not having a healthy diet, that kind of thing. And I experimented with that, where I just, in the thing was, it wasn't like I was assigning a certain kind of meat to eat. It was just choosing once a day, eating a meat once a day. Now, I was still eating other processed foods too, and that's kind of where you start to learn. I was still eating stuff like Pop Tarts and cereal and Hamburger Helper. Oh, that was a big thing for me for a lot of years. But eventually, I kind of stopped eating meat because it was expensive. When you're in college, yeah, you just don't have a lot of food. So I would, go to the grocery store when I had a vehicle and able to get to this grocery store. I had to start buying in bulk too. And that meant the food choices that I was choosing had to be purposeful. They had to last. Thus, again, still back to the hamburger helper kind of thing. So I would eat lots of beans and rice. Meat was, again, I wasn't trying to have lots of meat because, again, it was pricey. And I just didn't have the way to, just have that access to it often. So there was that. Eventually, once I came out of college, though, I was I was already very active too. That was another thing. Very active. So I double majored. I only ended up with 1 degree, but I double majored and I had a minor. I know. I was so busy. So I learned a lot through my fitness classes when I was taking them. I ended up with my first six pack when I was 19, 20 years old by accident. And I didn't even know it until one morning. I was trying to put on my clothes and I just happened to look in the mirror from across the room as I'm putting on a shirt or something, and I see my abs and I freak out because then I'm like, what? Again, remember, this is in the 90s. I was like, I was as they say, shook. I was freaking out a little bit, and it was because I was eating. I do remember I was eating dairy for a while, but then I stopped eating dairy. Then I started upping the legumes. So there was the beans. I was walking or biking everywhere on college campus, and anything. And oh yeah, I was always starving. That was another thing. I was always hungry because I was a growing girl. And I had my fitness classes, had my dance classes, and then another fitness class. And like I said, I was walking and biking everywhere. And I would carry with me like snack crackers because remember, I was still eating kind of snacky foods still, but I wasn't eating as much. So it was kind of like calorie restrictive, but I was doing a lot more movement at the time as well. Now, let's fast forward a little bit into once I moved and left college and I moved to the big city, moved to Atlanta, and my first few years here, and I still live in Atlanta. I have my parents' home for which I'm on the deed. Okay, so I have two homes, and I was again a starving artist. I was looking to become a singer songwriter performer, that kind of thing. I ended up working, my first long term job was at an art supply store. So I learned how to, work in an office and all this other stuff. And I was, I was also having health issues too. So I'm not saying everything was like awesome and perfect. I still suffered from migraines a lot growing up from when I was starting puberty even up until that point, because I do remember going to see a neurologist for a while, and they wanted to put me on medication for it. I mean, I think I started it for a little while, and then I stopped, and then you get caught up in the life of life, and I left that job, and I was in a series of other jobs. I was still doing my own music, and I I was, again, when it came to the food, though, I still wasn't eating lots of things. In fact, I was, again, leaning into that hamburger helper, and that leads me to the other thing. So I was portion controlled and I was meal planning. So even when I was working a job, I didn't even have the money to do it, to go out to lunch, to go even to McDonald's of all things. So what I was doing was buying my hamburger helper. At first, I was doing ground beef. Then I moved over to turkey. Then I found the tuna helpers. Those were great. But then I would take one box of those, and I would divide it up into excuse me, 5 portions, because that was my lunch for the week. And I was able to, be able to eat a lunch. I would have to bring my lunch every day and to work, and that was the portion control part, right? And when it came to dinners at home, I would be able to, and this is me now living in Atlanta, be able to make pot dinners, like as in things you put in a pot and just eat like that. Not to say that I was like, again, starving. I was eating well. I started back eating more meats, especially with the lunch, because of the hamburger helper thing. And so I was eating meat more and leaning into sugars again. And yeah, so things got bad. And of course, I was a young adult out there living the dream, drinking the alcohols and whatnot and having the sugars. And I I gain weight? Yes. At one point, I started gaining weight maybe about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, because I also started dating long term. And I always say, and I go to the doctor regularly. Um, when I started seeing this one particular person, I wanted to be on birth control. And I'd always heard the thing about going on birth control will have you gain weight. And I said that to my doctor at the time, and she was like, no, that's not true, because what really is happening is you are in a committed relationship and you're more settled and you feel like more like, comfortable and this and that. And I kind of was like, okay, whatever. But deep down, I knew in my gut, it was like, it's hormones. It's hormones. But I went on birth control. I did. I don't remember for how long, but I know eventually I did stop. Um, and it did a number on my system. And I'm not gonna lie. It just made my body not be able to function well in a lot of different ways. And I don't know if I can go into too many details, but I knew my system was out of whack. Yeah, and that was in my 30s. So my system was a bit out of whack. But even though I was trying to eat well, so I wasn't like going crazy with the eating. But then again, when you're in a relationship, and depending on who you're in a relationship with, I will say that their eating habits become your eating habits. If you're trying to do something for yourself, you got to be committed and you've got to be stand firm with it. That's another lesson I learned that moving forward, I will never make again, where just because he's paying doesn't mean I have to eat pizza every day. Doesn't mean I have to eat wings every day. Doesn't mean I have to drink soda every day. And it's not worth it. It's not. It's really not. So I think even as women, we can stand up for ourselves and say, you know what? If that's how you want to eat, that's well and good and fine. But I have a different, mindset. So again, those, I had two relationships. The first one actually was a more healthy one, and that's when I first started going on the birth control. Like, he was a runner, so it wasn't like he was just being completely out of pocket. But he would eat a lot of food because he was an athlete already. And then I was, found myself in a different relationship years later, where this particular person, he worked in a restaurant. So a lot of the food that he was giving me, bringing me, he knew how to cook. First of all, because he was a cook in a restaurant. But then he was also bringing me, having me eat, like, I even took photos and everything. It's not, when we know better, we do better, right? So he was making good food, but it wasn't always healthy food. And there was also other unhealthy habits that we would get ourselves into. Next thing you know, we're eating and watching movies all the time, staying in and watching movies and eating, so there comes those habits. And again, going back, if I had to do it all again, I would have been more on top of my routines even before I started dating and stuck to it rather than to like just go along with whatever the guy is doing. Even if the guy is super ultra healthy, you still have to know what's right for your body. Okay? So after that second relationship ended, I'm trying to remember the year. So it was like 2013. Yeah, we get depressed, right? It happens. We weren't a match, and that's okay. Things happen like that, and you get depressed. You find yourself lost. You fall into bad habits. That the eating, snacking, the drinking, all those things. The biohacking definitely fell off by then because I was also around that time looking for stability. Because when I started dating that other person, I was technically unemployed. I was working for myself. I started giving music lessons, started substitute teaching. I was going back to school. There was a lot going on. And there was also when the first market crash happened in about, I think, 2009. Yeah. about 2009. And so we were together during that time. It was volatile. The time that was, our relationship was not volatile, but we just realized eventually we just weren't a match moving forward. So by the time we broke up, I was not in the best of places with my habits. And this is really the key to it all. I think I was like in my late 30s by then. And then I am going to say this. So I've always looked younger than my age, always. And that might be again because of where I grew up and my foundational eating habits. So when I started, falling off, I don't think it gave much damage. But during the first, I guess, market crash, like I said, we'll just call it the market crash, that my habits really were out of sorts. I was, like I said, depressed. Weight did come on. Like I think at my biggest, I was like 180, and once I realized that, I was like, ooh, I don't. Ooh, that's hard. So I'm 5'7.5", and 180, well, might not look that bad on me. I felt it, and I felt it in such a way that it was hard for me to. I'm trying to find the right words. Recover from things like illnesses and stuff like that. And it wasn't until I got walking pneumonia in that year, it was 2015 by then. I got walking pneumonia and I didn't know I had it. And there was the shooting, one of many shootings, the South Carolina shooting, that I had a panic attack because I was thinking about my family. And again, I wasn't having the best of habits. In fact, I was like struggling financially a lot, doing odd jobs. I was making it, but it was hard. So there was a lot of stress going on there. But it wasn't until I got pneumonia, and I'm trying to remember, maybe I got it from a student, and I was overweight. Like I said, I was like maybe at my heaviest 180, maybe 185. My blood pressure was up. I didn't know that. I was still drinking alcohol a lot, a lot, a lot. And I had a panic attack. All those things compounded led me to going to the emergency room. I discovered I had pneumonia, and you know, I talk about that story a bit more in the book I'm writing. So if you're interested, just let me know. I can put you on my waiting list as I hash it all out. But compounding, that's how illnesses start. Now, as we can walk back the steps. So I was depressed, number one. I was drinking alcohol, number two. Bad habits, being depressed, you're just eating to survive. You're stressed. I didn't have a steady job. I had work, but it wasn't very steady, back then. All of those things compounded to my eventual breakdown of my immune system. Once my immune system was compromised, it was easy for me to get ill. And I got walking pneumonia in the summertime, y'all. Okay. And as I was worked to recover, I started thinking a lot about our bodies and how, even when I was younger, I remember, that story I just told you about one of my relatives passing after a year of just still eating bad. It wasn't like they gave him a miracle drug or anything like that. He said to stop eating certain things. And that made me think. I was like, you know what? I need to stop doing certain things. And I definitely wanted to stop drinking. I don't think I was an alcoholic by no means, but I know that eventually, as I was talking to some people, realizing alcohol has sugar in it. And as I started to learn more, teach myself more, and realize how addictive is not the alcohol per se, it's the sugar in the alcohol. That's the problem. So it wasn't just alcohol. So when people say they stopped drinking and they lost weight, what you're doing is you're eliminating a big sugar source too, a big sugar source. And sugar makes you crave more sugar. So while as much as we talk about like stop the drinking, and there's other harmfulness, things when it comes to the alcohol, really it's the sugar. So when you start cutting out sugar in your life, the like I mean, when I talk about eliminating sugar, this is going to be the single hardest thing that a lot of people have to do. But that's the one thing you need to do in order to save your life. So as I talk about having longevity, I still wanted to be a performer, a musician. I play guitar. Like I said, I was giving lessons. I started thinking about my joints, my joint health, like my fingers and stuff. And so I started asking a lot of my comrades who are also musicians, who are older than me, like older by 10 and 15 years, like, what are you doing to keep your chops up, the exercise, So again, all of this was about me having freedom. Like, I want to continue to be a performer. I don't want like to have like health issues. I started realizing that this is going to take this massive thing to get hold of. So when I realized it was sugar was the thing, I knew my life was going to be a lot different. And I was about, so I'd always, like I said, as you can, hear from my story, is that I kind of already had a lot of foundational things, and then I fell off, and then there things happen, life happens. But then I returned back to what I grew up on. Then I started studying. And this is also where YouTube came into play for me. A lot of people didn't know this, or I hope they realize it now. YouTube is not just for people out here pulling stunts like this. Is again back in 2013. YouTube had whole stations or channels of universities on it. So I had this background in learning and research and nerding out on different things, wanting to know what's the best foods to eat, what are the best, I don't know. I wasn't on medication. Again, remember I stopped with the migraine medication long ago, and had already stopped taking the birth control long ago. Because it was messing up my system. Like, I really just couldn't. Like, when I say messing up my system, like, yeah, that's the best way I can describe it. It's like recovery was difficult for me. Like, I'm not saying I just don't get sick. Recovery was difficult. So that told me that my immune system was compromised. So I had to really start thinking about things. Like, how does your body work? How is it that people live even though they are massively overweight? Like, people, we weren't like this 100, 200 years ago. There were some people, but not on this scale. There weren't this many people walking around with all this excess weight. And I'm not here to slam anybody who is overweight or obese, because the things I learned in this process, I really do feel like there has not been a conspiracy, but another consequence of technology that has turned harmful. I learned about the FDA. I learned about metabolisms. I learned about my body system. I learned about the immune system. And then when I finally went back into working full time, I secured a teaching job in a progressive school that I still work in now. That I wanted, again, that freedom, but I also knew I needed to start building up that foundation yet again. Foundation of health. So I had to start thinking about my longevity, getting to where I am right now back then. So again, this is around like that 2013, 14, 15, where I finally, when I got sick, it was the most, I felt my mortality in that. I wasn't even 40 years old by then. I felt deathly ill to the point where I was getting scared. I was really getting afraid for my health. And I knew I had to save myself, because even when I got a teaching job and I went to the doctor and I was already recovering from pneumonia, this was a black woman doctor. So this is not even about saying that this is, I feel like it's the industry in itself that I learned eventually too that there are doctors who, they don't get nutrition training at all. I learned that eventually. And my doctor, this black woman doctor that I hunted down. I wanted a black woman doctor, right? You want somebody who looks like you, who can relate. So I went to this woman, and I the visit was maybe 20 minutes. She didn't even sit down. I was highly disappointed. I had things written down, things, because I remember when I was going to the doctor for my migraines, they started telling me it's important to write down like food diaries, things like that. So I knew what to do. And I had this information when I was ready for this new doctor. And she didn't even ask me anything about like what my lifestyle was like. She was one of the, I will call them the checklist doctors. And I've had a couple of those. And again, all of these doctors that I'm talking about that I thought I could trust because they look like me. And I'm not saying that don't trust doctors that look like you, but they were doing what they were taught. She told me to eat right and exercise. That's all. Eat right and exercise. But as you can see, I didn't have a lifestyle that was just so deadly, right? It was a little bit deadly, but it wasn't that deadly. But she treated me just like I'm sure she treated anybody who came in who was, you know, 35 plus years old. Maybe, like I said, I was probably 80, 180 by then. I don't know how much I weigh now, but by the way, I'm just saying because that's not how you measure your health. But um, I was definitely, my blood pressure was really sky high by then. And that's what she told me, eat right and exercise. And I didn't, I was just by that tone that she was saying it. And she didn't, like I said, she didn't even sit down. She didn't even bother to ask me any questions. And I was just disappointed. But something in me clicked because of that. I decided not to say that I was just going to do this all myself, but I needed to educate myself. And that's where it led me to YouTube. Now, YouTube has like the Mayo Clinic, Stanford University, like all of these medical hospitals. Some of them have channels, Some of them have lectures that I just started watching and listening to because I needed to know, like, first of all, how does my body work in general? How is it supposed to work in its best form? So nobody talks about that. And that's what I was learning and teaching myself. And then when I really started getting more into my job as a teacher, one of the first things I knew I had to do was improve my immune system. I needed to strengthen it. I also needed to improve my energy because these children are not going to let you have a break, So those are the two things I wanted to work on. So my immune system and my energy. And that's what led me to, after recovering from my walking pneumonia, which led to yet another complication, by the way. So I can talk about that, but I do have info on that and you can check that out later. But there was the recovery, which was just as bad, if not worse, than the pneumonia. But I mean, I had one working lung for a while, you know? and I was having brain fog, and I still wanted to work, but in order to have health insurance, of course, you got to work in the United States. There was a lot going on for me. And I think me educating myself on how my body works and then really just thinking, okay? I know a lot of people are asking or looking for that one magical thing, and everybody's looking for that one food, that one, and what they call the superfoods. I remember that phase. I don't even know if marketers are even talking about that anymore, superfoods. It's like it's not just one thing. It's not just one thing. And as I started to learn more about my body and what my body needed was the minerals, okay, the vitamins and the minerals. And I think I was still taking, see, and that was another thing. I was still doing a lot of good things, but then I had to eliminate a lot of things too. So I was taking multivitamins. I sure were. But a lot of people talk about, well, you just need the multivitamin and you don't need to be specializing in your vitamins and minerals. And I say to that, do what works for you. Because a lot of people will say, well, you're going to have really expensive looking pee. I was like, you know what? Maybe I want that. Maybe I want that. Okay? Because it helped me restore my health. Once I realized in that the key mineral that I needed for some overall recovery was magnesium, I started taking magnesium on a regular basis. I still take magnesium, and that is the one mineral that I think a lot of people are missing in their life, in their diet. And I started building from there, magnesium. Okay, then I started to research immune systems. And I'm still working on that because I still have a lot of allergies like hay fever, but I think I'm getting better, getting a lot better. Even as of this date, I do not take Claritin anymore. I stopped taking Claritin around maybe 2001 because it raises your blood pressure. Okay? And yeah, so I'm still out there looking. So, I'm always a work in progress, but I'm doing pretty good for what I'm doing now. And yeah, so I'm doing a lot of research, studying up, learning about my mind and my body because my mind was having brain fog. So I started really getting into cognitive health, and that led me to, like I said, that the magnesium, and then it also led me into the world of biohacking. So this was when Dave Asprey was still a little overweight, and he was talking about the bullet coffee and all the stuff. And I was following him. I also started because I thought I was going into menopause too, by the way. So I wasn't even 40 yet, but I really thought I was going into menopause. I might have actually been going into menopause because of how I was eating. And so I found another doctor. Well, first of all, Dave Asprey is not a doctor, but he is a biohacker. But I did find one of the doctors I still rock with now is Sarah Gottfried. Um, because I thought I was going into menopause, I needed a female doctor. So I found her online, and she was talking about hormonal health. And she was talking about the struggles she was going through back then, as she was getting older. And even as a doctor herself, her doctor was gaslighting her. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, what are we going to do? So there was Sarah Godfrey. She helped a lot. I changed a lot of my eating habits based on her advice and things like that. Then I'm trying to think of the next doctor that I found. So I want to say Jason Fung was next, but then there was Ken Berry. I think Jason Fung because I was really still looking into not necessarily weight loss. I was looking into preventing things like diabetes because I started getting the scare of the diabetes, high blood pressure, and the diabetes. And he is an entomologist, or he is a gastroenterologist. But basically, he is a doctor that is he gets a lot of these patients. So when I started watching his videos, and that was around, I want to say 2017. Watching a lot of his videos helped me a great deal, and he introduced me to the idea of intermittent fasting. And he sold me on it because he was talking about the history of fasting and how we got trained into eating 3 meals a day, trained into eating 6 meals a day, and it started to click, you know? So he was definitely instrumental in my biohacking human optimization journey. Thank you, Jason Fung. Okay, so he was there, and then there was Ken Berry, who I'm trying to remember how I came across him. I don't clearly remember, but I do remember him telling his story about he is still a doctor. I think he has his own private practice now. But he was a doctor living in the South, in Tennessee. He was overweight. He was a country doctor. And he was telling his patients the same thing that black woman doctor was telling me: eat right and exercise. But then he started thinking about it. He said to himself, Self, how am I telling people to eat right and exercise when I am this many pounds overweight? Are they really going to believe me? Are they really going to trust what I'm saying? So he's written a couple of books, and I definitely want you checking those out too, because he goes more into his story as well about how he just started thinking back on his education as a doctor, and how there's some fundamental things that should be there in that education that wasn't there, and how he fixed his health. Okay, so as I again move more into this human optimization, I started thinking about wellness. What does it mean to be well? Not just sick and not wanting to be sick. What about the opposite? How do we become our very best healthy selves? And the only thing that was on the market, and again, this is back in 2016, 17, where you see people doing the boot camps or this extreme weight loss, get super skinny, and that again wasn't necessarily what I wanted. I wanted to be healthy. I just wanted to be healthy. And I really started thinking about how, through Jason Fung especially, I'm just going to keep saying his name until the algorithms realize I have benefited from his work, that he just made me realize how we just got trained in a certain way of thinking about what health is supposed to look like, what it actually is, through cultural differences. And he is last I checked, or when I remember watching him at first, he was living in Australia, I think, or New Zealand. And he's an Asian man, and he started talking about like how religiously people would fast, and he would talk about culturally that was not colonial, how people would treat fasting. And I was just like, you know what? People have been living for thousands of years up until this last 150 years, 200 years, where we had the Industrial Revolution, and we've had these things come into our existence, like food factories and FDA, which FDA had this, it had a noble beginning. I will say that. It had a noble beginning, but now I don't know. I don't know. And so I learned a lot from watching his videos and doing my own research, follow up. Like when he would say something, I would go research it more, because that's how deeply I cared about being healthy. Not about being skinny, not about being buff or having super muscles. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention. Yeah, I used to lift weights in high school too. So I was, I had a lot of the foundational things. It wasn't like I just didn't know anything. I just knew I wanted to feel better. I knew I wanted to be strong and healthy. And here I am. About to turn 50 years old. Still looking for new ways. I always do experiments. I love experimenting on myself. That's why I consider myself a biohacker. And yeah, it's about really learning who you are. Not necessarily listening to what other people are saying. Even when you go to I guess those talk shows, the daytime talk shows, and they talk about the latest fad, and reading in between the lines. Okay, now we have social media. Now we have things like more than just YouTube. We've got Facebook. We've got Instagram. We've got TikTok. We've got I can't think of the other threads. We've got a lot of the other things coming up that are sources of information. Then there are people who just are out there to gain followers who will say whatever it is they need to say. And then there's people who've lived the life. Oh yeah, there's also other YouTubers that I did follow. Butter Bob Briggs. He was also, notice I'm leaning into a lot of the people who I grew up country. I'm just not gonna lie. I grew up country. You might hear the draw, whatever. So the Ken Berry appealed to me because he was a country doctor. Then Butterbob Briggs because he just was like just telling it as it is. So he went on the ketogenic diet because of his wife passing away. You know, so sometimes you got to have that breakdown to break through. And I don't think he makes videos anymore, but I think he does leave up his old videos as legacy. I don't think he wants to do more videos. I think, he that was a part of his grieving process, and I thank him for it. He talked a lot about the science of eating uh, keto, right? So there was times that I slipped into keto eating. I've even done carnivore for a bit of time because I needed to. So there's different ways of eating. So that's why I also don't necessarily tell people like this is the one thing. There's not one thing. You just need to know how your body works. Try something. If it doesn't work, try something else. Okay? That's the advice I want to give. And if you're interested in more, let me know. And with that, I say take care. Bye.